For this guide for Hanya, I'll be giving you her best relic, Lightcone's, Teamcomp Rotations, and her pros and cons. Do note that this is all speculations and subjected to changes. I'll upload a new video if there's any changes to her kit. For this video, I won't be going through on how she works, but she's pretty much the same as Bronya, just instead of crit damage, she scales on speed instead. For required Ascension, trace materials, and skill priority, I'll just leave pictures down below as I do not want to drag the video. For her Eidolons breakpoint, E1, E2, E4, and E6. She is easily sufficient. Her E1 gives her speed when an ally with Hanya's ultimate effect defeats an enemy. At E2 increases her speed with her skill, this allows her to guarantee 2 turns in one cycle. At E4 her ulti buff is way more consistent with almost a 100% uptime. At E6 she's able to generate additional skill points over time. Overall, her massive Eidolon breakpoint is at E2. How to build Hanya? For her main stat, for the body you want HP percentage over defense percentage. For the boots you want speed only. Substat priority, speed till 150 to 160 plus. After that, focus on HP percentage, defense percentage, or effect rest. Anything over 160 plus speed has very diminishing returns, but higher speed is good to have, especially for both her E1 and E2. How you build Hanya also depends on your Lightcone, where you may want to opt for lower speed instead. You may even opt to go for semi-sub DPS Hanya only if you're on past and future Lightcone with her E3. Though highly not recommended as you have to skill spam every turn, and without physical weakness she's going to deal way lesser damage. Onto her Relic Set is very straightforward. Her best in slot will be Messenger traversing hacker space. For that, 6% speed to hit 152 speed without any speed substat with speed boots. The 4-piece bonus also does skills well with Hanya. Or 4-piece Musketeer, though Messenger is highly preferred. 2-piece Messenger is also fine with any other random 2-piece set. And now for the Planar Ornament, main stat you want energy regen only, and for the op you want HP percentage or defense percentage only. She has 3 Planar Ornament set, they are all around equal. The first is Fleet of Ageless for the extra 8% attack buff for your team. The second best is Broken Q, especially with DPS like Blade, which doesn't scales on attack. This Relic Set will be your preferred option. And lastly, the new set for the small energy regen boost and the additional same element type damage boost, though not really recommended as it doesn't give any ulti breakpoints. It all comes down to which is easier to farm for your account and team comp. Now for Hanya's Lightcone, I'll start from the worst to best. She has a ton of good Lightcones. It all comes down to your playstyle and team comp, where you may want a certain Lightcone over another. At last place, we have Planetary Rendezvous. Only use this Lightcone if you have a physical DPS, for example, argenti. If you do, this Lightcone will be her third or second best option, depending on superimposition. At 4th place, we have Past and Future. This will instantly be her second best Lightcone if you have 2 harmony units, for example, Hanya and Tingyun. Tingyun will be using Past and Future to skill spam for your DPS. Since Hanya is very skill point positive, we don't have to worry about skill points at all. This makes Hanya indirectly slightly on par with Bronya, without the need to drop her speed for 2 turns in one cycle. We'll be placing this Lightcone at 4th place as it's very tricky to use. With this Lightcone on Hanya, instead, you require precise speed tuning with your DPS. And it totally depends on your team comp if it will work. Though as long as you're activating this Lightcone once every 2 turns, it's at least on par with any other Lightcone. The place will be Bronya's initial Lightcone as it increases the wearer's energy regeneration rate by 10% and generate 1 skill point when her ulti is used. The 30% damage boost is very good, but same downsides like Past and Future. Though with this Lightcone, you can even have Bronya E1 preferred in the same team comp with Hanya with Past and Future or the other way around with Imbibe with the Lune, and it will be her best in slot. The energy regen can help to hit certain breakpoints for ulti uptime once in a while. At 2nd place, we have both Taurus and the Battle Pass Lightcone, Crave the Moon. Taurus works great only if your team scales on attack percentage. For Crave the Moon, you will get 3 buff, which will rotate every time the wearer's turns begin, which puts this Lightcone above Taurus and is way more universal. I'm placing this Lightcone at 2nd place due to how easy it is to use. The best in slot will be Dancer's Dance. It's a very solid option and S1 sufficient, which helps your whole team and pretty much a guarantee with your DPS going 2 turns in one cycle, with 0 downsides. Unless you have both Bronya and Hanya together in the same team comp, you want to avoid this Lightcone, or with extremely slow DPS. Overall, don't stress out about the Lightcone, just use the one you prefer. And now for team comps and rotations. I won't really be talking too much about team comps as she's universal. For her rotations with 150 to 160 plus speed on Hanya, you're going to get 2 turns in 1 cycle with E2. For duo DPS team comp, you want Hanya into Topaz, into your sustain, into Clara. She can be used on a duo DPS team comp due to her talent, but you want to use her skill every 2 turns instead. With Imbibitor Lune plus Bronya, Hanya goes first into Bronya auto, into your sustain, into Imbibitor Lune, into Bronya skill, into Imbibitor Lune. It's great with Bronya too, especially when your team comp is extremely skill point negative, though a mono imaginary team is better for Imbibitor Lune. For her standard hyper carry DPS rotation, you want Hanya into Tingyun, into Argenti, into Foko, and into Hanya again. For pros and cons, pros, she's low-key a 5-star unit. She's S2 as S tier depending on your team comp. She's as good as Tingyun or better, and only slightly behind Bronya. She's a all-in-one harmony unit where her kit gives more skill point, damage percentage, attack percentage, plus speed boost. She's extremely good with DPS unit with 134 speed and above. She's free to play friendly. She works great too with duo DPS team comp due to her talent. She gives a ton of skill points. Cons, she spikes more at A2. For DPS with low speed or doesn't scale with attack percentage, she's not needed. She will certainly be outskilled when a future 5-star harmony unit is out in future. So she'll build for Hanya. If you need more skill points for your team, yes. And if you already have enough harmony or debuffers for 2 teams and can clear MOC 10 fine, you don't have to build her unless you really like her character design. Now for those of you wondering if E6 Hanya is on par with Bronya, Hanya wins with 30% attack over Bronya from ulti. Bronya wins by 38% damage boost over Hanya, not including Lightcone. Bronya wins by 30 to 40% crit damage roughly. For speed factor, I'll just say that they are equal since both Bronya and Hanya can get their DPS to go 2 turns in 1 cycle roughly, with Hanya being less consistent. Huge bonus for Hanya is that she's more skill point positive compared to E1 Bronya, where she's 0.5 plus positive with 150 plus speed, where Hanya is at least roughly plus 2. On average, Tingyun loses around 40% damage boost over Bronya, and unfortunately, Hanya DPS is roughly the same as Tingyun, or only slightly better, with in consideration that Hanya speeds buff your DPS to go twice per cycle. This puts her above Tingyun by roughly 5 to 50% plus based on your team comp synergy, though at most cases 10% at best due to too much factors with different units. At best case scenario, E6 Hanya unfortunately still loses to Bronya by a minimum of 30 to 35% if not more, though it's actually pretty impressive especially for a 4-star unit to be this close to a 5-star, especially with zero investment needed on relics. And with more units with different archetype coming out in future, Hanya has potential. But do note she will certainly be outskilled when a future 5-star harmony unit is out in future, especially when we have not gotten a single limited harmony buffer yet in the game, which can even be similar to Hanya's kit. And that's it for this guide.